What is up, Huda Nation? Welcome back inside another edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. I'm your host, Chris Vogel, and this program is brought to you by Scott McNair Injury Lawyers. If you've been injured in any kind of accident, car, truck, 18-wheeler, or hurt offshore, Scott McNair handles it all. You can give him a call at 504-500-1111 for a free consultation. They'll always fight for the win. Now joining me for the start of this episode of the Straight Up Saints podcast is Saints reporter John Hendrix. John, what's going on, man? How's everything?
It's going good. We've got some weird showers that moved through the area, so that was a little bit weird. But no, everything's good. Just taking a moment, entering June. I mean, we got a little bit of football left, and we'll be kind of dry out here for at least 4 or 5 weeks afterwards. So, but I'm good, man. Hope you're doing well too.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned, June's going to be a little dry, especially after mid-June. Saints fans are definitely going to be lacking those videos and all the content we're getting over the last couple of days. And I'm curious, John, this is the second week now of OTA'S, second session that you attended. And I'm just going to start off with the most important position that everyone loves to talk about, and that's the quarterback spot. I'm just curious for you, what have you kind of seen so far from Derek Carr, but not just Derek Carr, Jameis Winston as well?
Yeah, look, and I mean, the thing is that, we talked about this kind of like with Lance the other week, is just the fact that, OTA's kind of catered to the offense and such. So with Derek Carr, what I like is I like the aggressiveness. I like the fact that he looks like he's getting a little bit more comfortable with each week that passes. And so again, Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, familiar targets that he's eyeing right now, and it's working, right? He hit 2 big plays to Rasheed Shaheed. I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more. And then defense is starting to catch its stride. But look, I think Derek Carr is getting more comfortable in what he's doing right now. And the same, look, you can't forget about Jameis Winston, right? I think that he's got a renewed sense. You look at him during practice, the guy's happy to be here. He's happy to just be around and just being able to learn. And it looks like there's no brace on him, obviously. I think that's a huge, significant development for him too. And look, at some point, and we've talked about it on this program and talked about on Blue Crew, that, there's a potential opportunity that exists that, if Jameis does well, that might mean some good things for his potential outlook as a starter. But look, for now, he's there. Good quarterback room with Jake Haener. So I'm really excited about this quarterback group. I think it's easily the top one in the NFC South, one of the top in the NFC, maybe one of the top in the NFL, at least on paper.
Yeah, absolutely. And, quarterbacks also as good as what they have at the wide receiver position. You alluded to it just a couple of moments ago, Rashid Shaheed. And I know everyone's going to talk about Chris Olave and what he can do in year 2, rightfully so. 1,000 yards last year, obviously really lived up to his draft billing. Rashid Shaheed, undrafted guy, comes in, especially in December and January, really made a lot of big plays for this offense. And just judging by what everything was that was being said on Twitter, all the reports and all the nuggets just dropped and people's Saints OTA'S outlooks, seems like he had a great week for you. What was so impressive about what Rasheed Shaheed was doing out there?
Yeah, so first of all, I'd say just build off of a very good first week, right? First week, you could tell, just looked crisp on his routes, looked like he was getting off of his breaks really good, just, first step, all the things. And Dennis Allen kind of talked about this after practice. The main thing is he's playing with a lot of confidence right now, and it shows, right? And so he made 2 of the best plays. One of them everybody got to see. The other one was kind of like most everybody was out of the picture except for maybe a few of us because of the way practice was ending. But, he made a great play in 7-on-7, running a little crossing route against Alontae Taylor in the slot. Derek Carr throws it a little bit. He puts a one hand out there and just grabs it. I mean, it made it look so effortless. And I know it's like, well, yeah, it's a receiver, kind of do it. But it just had a certain like show off swagger type moment for me that I was just like, man, that's reminiscent of what Jarvis Landry was doing last year, and it's just good to see, again, that confidence show up for him. And then he made, obviously, the other play, or I think probably the play of the day, where he got behind a defense in 11-on-11, got behind JT Gray and Isaac Yiadom, big play downfield, probably would have went for a touchdown game action. At worst case, it would have set them up in a big spot in the red zone. So I like the chemistry brewing between him and Derek Carr right now. I think it's only going to get better. But look, this guy, there's a lot of reasons to be excited about him. And I'm not telling you he's going to finish as wide receiver 2 statistically on this team or going to have this huge 1,000-yard season. But I do think his role in the offense is going to make it a nightmare for a lot of these other opposing defenses, because if you can get Mike back, if you have the threat of Foster Moreau, Juwan Johnson, Taysom Hill, Alvin Kamara, Jamal Williams, all of these weapons that this team has, and obviously Chris Olave, this is a tough offense to stop. I mean, I'm just saying, if the protection is there, they get the run game going. There's so many ways. It's probably reminiscent about what we expected last year from this team in the offense, but now they've got the pieces in place, real pieces in place, and I think they got the quarterback to help lead them there.
Yeah, and I agree with you in terms of like we don't need to put numbers on what he may do, but I am curious from what you said, John. Do you feel like it's at the point where you feel really good about sharpening him into that number 3 spot at wide receiver, and it's not just out of necessity of needing a wide receiver 3? It's almost like, man, this kid has absolutely earned a starting role.
Yeah, I think so. I think he's earned the reps. Look, I think for me, it's always been Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed are your top options. I mean, you're assuming Michael Thomas is back, so Thomas would be the other one. And I think 4, 5, maybe up to 6 on the depth chart is where the battles are going to happen. Where can Brian Edwards beat out, some of the other guys? Can Shaq Davis make a name for himself? Can James Washington make somewhere on this roster? Can A.T. Perry make sure to solidify himself as a guy? So I think there's a lot of good weapons there. And, look, things could change because we're entering the post-June 1st territory. Hunter Renfro's name's been a hot one that's been thrown out too. We'll see how that all comes together. But, man, it's a blessing, because you think about the days, and again, no disrespect here, but you have Kevin White out there. You had Kenny Stills out there. I mean, you just had all these guys, and it just wasn't the same. But now they have legitimate threats there, and they still have veterans, guys like Keith Kirkwood going in their 6th year. So, I mean, this is a real trouted battle right now. And, guys like Traquan Smith are just keep getting pushed down a little bit more here and there. But look, I think Shaheed is definitely in that top 3 conversation when you look at starting to piece out that depth chart. Now, where his role is ultimately, that remains to be seen, but I'm really excited about the element that he's going to bring. And not only just in the receiving game, but they like to use the gadget plays with him last year too, the jet sweeps, all the different types of things. And it's something that we're probably not really talking about when you talk about his outlook, but I think he's in for some real big, a real big season, a real big jump this season.
Yeah, I totally agree. And when we look at old receiving cores, it's not even like a disrespect thing. No one means it that way, but we actually lived in a time where we're watching a Saints Buccaneers game and the broadcasters are going, who are these guys, like during a big play? And it just kind of put you in that spot where you really didn't know who was going to step up and if you had the playmakers to do so. But we're definitely, and that's something we talked about even with Lance a couple weeks ago. I mean, there's going to be fights for that 4, 5, 6 spot on the depth chart. So it's going to be fascinating how that goes down. Before I switch over to the defensive side, John, I have a question about the offensive line. I know that it's just the first day of June, and we have, a lot of time before we get to the beginning of the regular season and what that starting unit's going to look like. But through OTAs right now, it seems like it's Eric McCoy, and then that's it for actual first stringers working with the first team offense. And I'm curious for you, is there any concern about the fact that if you do look at the offensive line, Ramchek's been banged up the last couple of years, pending obviously 2 injuries in his rookie season. Ruiz, really, really strong season last year, silenced a lot of his critics. But then, obviously that ends with an injury. And then Pete, who obviously fights through a lot of injuries, but you do have that concern if he were to miss time. I don't want to say maybe concern level, but how do you feel about the offensive line right now? I know it's early, but again, like I said, it's McCoy and then a lot of second stringers at the moment.
Yeah, I'll worry a little bit more when I go into training camp and I don't start seeing these guys. Now, here's what I can say for starters is McCoy is the only constant there, right? And I think it's important for him to be there. I'm not too worried about James Hurst. I'm not worried about Ramczyk, because even with the plan the Saints had, giving him that veteran rest day every Wednesday, always on the injury report with rest, he still ended up playing 95% plus snaps in the offense. So it was never an issue for Ramczyk, really. Pete, it's just one of those things where I feel like he really needs to be out there, needs to be on the field. He's one of those guys, wouldn't say a roster bubble candidate or anything like that, but, maybe they look at moving him or something like that if they feel like the better option is out there. But, look, here's what I would say about Cesar Ruiz and Trevor Penning is they've been around OTAs. They're obviously not participating, but Ruiz, one of the things I wrote in my observation was that he's been there alongside Jari Evans, who's one of the assistants to Doug Marrone this year, and just kind of talking through, getting some of his knowledge. And meanwhile, you have Trevor Penning off to the side where they're working with the tackles with Kevin Carberry, that they're looking at and saying, Penning, although he's not practicing, he's going through the motions, he's actually mimicking some of the footwork, so he's trying to get in a basis of where he's actually there mentally. And I said this the other day on one of my appearances, I think he might have slimmed a little bit too, maybe his muscle added, and I don't think it's a bad thing, but I'm excited about where they're at. Training camp's really going to be the main thing, and you mentioned once we get over the hump of mid-June, it's about 4 or 5 weeks till the actual training camp happens. If those guys aren't there, I expect them to be cautious with Trevor Penning. I expect them to be cautious with Cesar Ruiz. Once we see Pete back, if they're not there for mandatory mini camp, I'll have a little bit more concern. But, overall offensive line, I feel pretty good about them. I like the depth there. I like guys like Landon Young coming back, Lewis Kidd, Calvin Throckmorton, even a Storm Norton, a veteran that's been around here for sure. So I feel like they'll be okay. And the thing is, with the Saints offensive line, you got to have that next man up mentality. It's just how it's happened over the past several years. You just got to be ready for that situation. I feel like they're in a position where they are in that spot if something does happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of piggybacking off that point, bringing up a comment from the live chat, John, just to fill in for everyone, who's out on the offensive line in terms of first team reps right now outside of McCoy?
Yeah, so left tackle is Landon Young. So then you got left guard is, I believe it's Lewis Kidd, and then right guard's Calvin Throckmorton, right tackle is Storm Norton. So, and of course that could change. Just I was also putting out there that Lewis Kidd was getting some work with the tackle group too. So thought that was a little bit interesting. And he played all those positions too in college, so it's not like it's a big deal. But that's kind of where you're looking at right now. They even put some Mark Evans at tackle too, a little bit, the undrafted rookie free agent from Arkansas Pine Bluff. So again, these starting looks, take them with a grain of salt. You can't really judge too much off of how offensive linemen and defensive linemen are doing out there just because there's no contact. And so even when we get into mini camp, again, no contact for phase 3. But once we get into training camp, that's when we start seeing, okay, are these defensive linemen, are they coming together? Or is this offensive line doing stuff and giving Carr their chances that he needs to be successful? So more information is needed, but right now, there's not too much to talk about there other than your main guys aren't there.
Yeah, and thank you for clearing that up. We'll switch over to the defensive side of the ball. I think one thing that people were kind of interested was Alontae Taylor playing a little bit more in the slot. Obviously, what he did last year, I don't know if their secondary is able to do what they did last year if he doesn't step up as a rookie in pressure situations. Yeah. What'd you find fascinating about him kind of playing in the slot a little bit over this week?
Well, this has been the plan for months now, something that I reported months ago that this is where things were going to go. And look, I'll tell you, they really do love Bradley Roby in the slot there, right? And just a veteran guy, knows how to handle himself. Alontae's learning that slot position. So again, Alontae wants to be out there. He wants to play. And, when this team is full strength, Marshawn Lattimore is going to be your starting outside cornerback. I'm pretty sure right now it would be Paulson Adebo as the other one, but, Taylor might give him a good run for his money, but you saw last year the value of having that depth there. And, need I remind people, fans, if you've been a fan for a long time, when they had like Brian Dixon and Devontae Harris or Stanley Jean-Baptiste out there, or, guys that are like, man, they're at the bottom of the barrel as far as the depth chart goes. And these are guys that are starting in action. But for Taylor, it's learning the position, trying to master it as much as he can. But, I'm really excited about getting this guy on the field in some shape, form, or fashion for sure. But look, it's Lattimore. Mickey Loomis said the other day they're banking on him returning to form. He obviously had the injuries last year that sidelined him, but when he came back, it was a noticeable difference. This team needs Marshawn Lattimore in it. Who starts opposite him? I'd give the slight edge right now to Paulson Adebo. I know some fans have felt certain ways, but Taylor could challenge him for sure. But I like Taylor in playing his slot. That's been the plan. They've tried different things. We've tried safeties there. I don't think it's a bad thing to learn cross positions because you never know what's going to happen in a game situation. And the Saints like to run that nickel, so they got to have some guys there since they don't have like your Justin Evans here or your PJ Williams anymore.
Yeah, and like you said, and I'm just thinking about now with the secondary, I think Marshawn Lattimore missed about 10 games last year. So for them to do what they did with him not in there, definitely helps to have that depth, and hopefully 23 is out there the whole time because that makes a huge difference, as we saw in the Eagles game in January. Keeping on the defense, 2 rookies of the defensive line. I think it's probably harder for you guys to kind of determine how much growth or development you're seeing from the D line? Because, like we've mentioned before, it's not like you're going through a bunch of contact drills. There's not much they can do in terms of the wow factor. But what have kind of been your early observations from guys like Brian Brzee and then Isaiah Foskey?
Yeah, tough to gauge those guys just because you don't see a lot of them and they're buried on the depth chart. What I will say on the defensive line is it's good to see Peyton Turner out there. Again, we talked about this with Lance. That was the biggest thing for him. Be in the program. That's the main thing. And that was where you look at guys like Marcus Davenport when he was most successful. He was there from day one, was able to play a lot more. And that matters to a lot of these guys that, Turner has some potential still. I think he's somebody that they feel like they can get more from him, obviously, and that he can be a contributor. And now that he's healthy, I mean, that's the goal, right? And so, look, Brzee is going to be a big part of this defensive line. So is Isaiah Foskey. These guys are going to have a lot of snaps in rotation. They've obviously got to earn their stripes, but you look at the depth chart, the opportunities there, right? And on the pass rushing side, it's Cam, it's Carl Granderson. Then I give that edge to Tano, maybe Peyton Turner right there, but Foskey can push him a little bit. And then on the defensive tackle side, you got Colin Saunders, who's more of your shy tuttle run plugging type of guy. And then you got Nathan Shepard, who's more of your get after the quarterback, similar to David Onyemata. And then you have Malcolm Roach still. I think that's an area when you look at it that if you're looking at any post-June 1st moves for this team, defensive line, linebacker, those are the two areas I would expect the Saints to look. We talked about Yannick Ngakoue on one of them. I've seen Frank Clark's name thrown around. I don't know if I'd buy Clark. I'd actually rather Yannick Ngakoue personally. I think that he brings a lot of upside. He's been extremely successful. Hey, he was with the Raiders too, so why not, right? So I think there's something to be said. But, as far as Foskey and Brzee and the other rookies, tough to really get a gauge on him. Same thing with Jordan Howden. Nick Saldiveri, he was out there, but he in doing some work, the medicine ball, which is encouraging, even though he's got that calf injury. And then A.T. Perry, again, he's still trying to find himself a little bit too, just a little bit inconsistent, but I feel like he's going to bounce back. And, he's got a great teacher in Cody Burns.
Yeah, you mentioned Yannick, 9.5 sacks last year. The guy can still get after the quarterback, so
yeah,
that'd be quite the addition. Before I let you go, John, real quick, I know this is hypothetical, but it's a fun one anyway. Someone mentions, do you think the team would have interest in DeAndre Hopkins, or does it seem like this kind of might be one of those fan fiction situations? Obviously, there really hasn't been too much on the DeAndre front, and this is for every team, not just Saints. And we've even heard Jeremy Fowler about an hour ago said he's going to be patient. But do you think there might be a possibility where the team expresses interest?
I don't know. With DeAndre Hopkins, I don't say. I think the Hunter Renfrow thing might be more realistic than DeAndre Hopkins. And you look at it, just Hopkins needs to kind of revitalize things a little bit. And I mean, he's dominant. He can do a lot of great things. I think he's an excellent receiver. But I feel like they're pretty stacked and set on the outside. And look, again, if Mike doesn't show back up to training camp, which again, Mickey Loomis talking about it, giving an update on Mike that, look, he's would say that he's on track right now, and they expect him at the start of training camp, which would be a huge first step for him, just getting back out on the field. And so I think their vision is if you've got a healthy Michael Thomas or just Michael Thomas there, you've got some good backup plans. I don't see the need for DeAndre Hopkins right now. I get the pie in the sky. I feel like the needs are greater on defensive line and linebacking spot. And then if anybody gets a receiver, it's got to be Hunter Renfrow, just because a slot guy like that, I mean, a proven slot guy can create a lot of nightmares, and that familiarity with Derek Carr. Look, I think he's a true game changer. He'd offer a lot more upside than DeAndre Hopkins. But look, if injuries happen, they do. Never say never. I think there might be other veterans that they may look at too. James Washington was one that not many people were talking about, and he shows up, and we'll see where he ends up going, if anywhere. But I feel like they got a good core there, better room than they've had in years, and I'm pretty excited at that notion. So I don't think Nuke's going to be a realistic option. I think other teams are going to be in on him, which make more sense.
Yeah, I just have this feeling he's going back to the AFC. I could be wrong. That's just like my gut feeling at the moment, but we'll see how it plays out. John, thank you so much for taking the time to hop on, man. I really do appreciate it, and I hope to speak with you next week. Obviously, a week of OTAs. We'll see what happens, but I hope you enjoy the rest of your week, man.
Sounds good, man. Appreciate it as always. Thanks.
Once again, that was John Hendrix. And now going to switch gears a little bit and talk about real quick Rasheed Shaheed. Now, this is someone that I talked about with John briefly, and we're talking about a player that whether or not he can have a breakout year 2, I don't know if there's a number you put on a guy like Rasheed Shaheed and whether or not he hits, 800 yards, 1,000 yards, whatever it may be. But there's two things to me that I look at, and one of them is statistical base, and the other one is just thinking about what he brings from a skill set level to this offense that makes me think we are in for a big year. And before I get into those, just want to remind you guys, if you guys are still listening via YouTube and you want to get in some questions, whatever, I'll talk about those in about, let's say, 5 to 7 minutes. I could get to whatever comments, questions, predictions, concerns you may have. But back to the topic of Rasheed Shaheed. There's two things for me that make me really excited. The first thing is how he finished last season. And I always think there's, how players finish the year that could carry over into next year. And I think about this as teams too. I never like the idea of teams, I'm not going to say the word tanking, but the idea of it's okay to kind of lose your last 4 games because you're looking for a better draft pick. I just feel like you kind of establish a losing culture. And I think from Rasheed Shaheed's perspective, obviously September wasn't a factor. October had some big moments. The Bengals game had that rushing touchdown, on an end around, had that big touchdown against Arizona on a Thursday night game, albeit they got blown out, but a big play. November, not that much. And then December came around, and that's where it really, really hit. So Rasheed Shaheed for the season had 488 yards, 2 touchdowns, 28 receptions. What I find fascinating is 300 plus yards of that 488, those came in the last 5 games. So I think the fact that Rasheed Shaheed was able to average over 60 yards per game from the month of December on, and that equates to the fact that they went into Philly, that they went into Cleveland, and those weather conditions were frigid as all hell. And he produced, even though he's considered one of those speed guys. I think there's way more to his game than just the speed. And now that brings me to the physical skill set factor of it. I think Rasheed Shaheed's the type of receiver that I don't think you're just talking about just throwing it deep to him. What I saw him do on third down, what I saw him do in short yardage situations on those crossing routes, I think this guy can do it all. I really do. Now, he's not going to be the most physical receiver. He's not going to be a guy that just dominates you at the line of scrimmage off the release. But I think there's more to his game than just saying that he's a burner. I really do. And just like John said, I'm not going to attach a label to Rasheed Shaheed in yards, right? He doesn't have to hit 1,000 yards for me to be like, oh, Rasheed Shaheed had a great year too. But Rasheed Shaheed, if everyone's healthy, is coming out there and he's making an impact as the wide receiver 3, or God forbid Michael Thomas goes down again, is making a noticeable impact as the wide receiver 2, as he did last year with over 60 yards per game once he fully got that spot, you're doing it for me. And I think there's a lot to love about Rasheed Shaheed. I really do. I never thought what he did at the end of the season was a fluke. That's why I never bought the idea of drafting a wide receiver in the first round. Now, could we end up being wrong? Sure. But I think the Saints know they got something special in this kid. I know for a fact they feel that way. And I think for him, it's going to carry over, and I'm excited to see what he does. So I think Rasheed Shaheed is absolutely poised for a breakout season. Now, before I get into Jameis Winston, just want to remind you that this program is brought to you by Ladder and Bloom, and you can talk to Chris Smith of Ladder and Bloom, who's one of the top realtors in New Orleans. And if you want a free marketing valuation for your property, if you want to book a property tour, or just talk real estate with him, you can give him a call at 504-231-2004. Once again, 504-231-2004. Now, I mentioned Jameis Winston. All the talk's going to be about Derek Carr. Comes with the territory being the starting quarterback for an NFL franchise. But I think there's something to be said about this Jameis Winston situation where he could come in and have sour grapes. He could have rejected a revised contract, which he did not. There could have been different ways that this unfold. And listening to him this week, there were 2 quotes that came to mind. The first one is this: I know I'm still a starting quarterback in this league, but man, I have to be like, this is all about the process. This is all a process. And then the second part where he said, where I'm at right now is not what I visualize being in the near future. I'm focused on getting healthy, focused on taking advantage of the opportunity I have to serve Derek Carr, to serve the team, to serve this organization. So that tells me one thing. Anyone who thinks there's going to be some type of quarterback controversy or there's going to be some type of friction in the locker room, you could just kind of just kick that to the side. That's not going to be the case. What I do think is going to be fascinating, though, and this is why I want to mention Jameis Winston. Jameis Winston, like I said, respected veteran quarterback. He's been around the block, has had a 5,000-yard season. Obviously, people make the jokes about the 30 interceptions. But we've seen with Sean Payton, there's a way where he could dial that down. I'm not saying a trade will happen. But I do think if you look around the league, injuries always happen. I just wouldn't be surprised if, let's say, the Saints are doing well, Derek Carr's looking great in training camp, and another team has an uncertainty at the quarterback position. Do they call the Saints? Now, if that were to happen, Lord, does that put the Saints in an interesting spot? Because I think a trade is kind of complicated. I don't think it's an easy decision. Now, financially, it's not complicated. If you want the numbers, a post June 1st trade, and it's June 1st today, so it will be post June 1st if they ever try to trade him. $3.3 million dead cap charge for 2023. Not much. Really isn't going to cripple you. So money-wise, feasible. But I think this is where it becomes interesting when you talk about Jameis Winston's future with the Saints. First one is if you keep him, you got a quarterback as the backup who is in the upper echelon of number 2 quarterbacks in the league. If Carr goes down short-term, long-term, whatever it may be, and obviously no one wants that, but let's say it does, you feel like, okay, you're going back to last year's week 1 starter as your quarterback if Derek Carr goes down. Now, that's the positive side of it. The flip side is this. I think you can argue that if Derek Carr were to go down, the Saints season might be over anyway because there is a lot of this team thrusted into him in the fact that their chances are going to rely on Derek Carr. And I said this earlier when I was on Jordy Holtberg's show, and I'll say it again. As much as we talk about Dennis Allen being defensive-minded and the defense is always producing when he's leading the way, the Saints, if they're going to go and get to where they want to go and where we think they can go, Derek Carr's got to play good football. It can't be inconsistent football. It can't be okay football. It's got to be good football. So you can argue if he were to go down already, you're like, all right, is the season over? Who knows? So that's where you're like, okay, I can entertain the trade idea because if we lose Derek Carr, you're probably losing all hope anyway, as opposed to the flip side where you say, oh, it's fine, we have Jameis. Those are two ways to look at it. The other way I look at it is something that John mentioned. John mentioned Hunter Renfrow. The Raiders right now have a Jimmy Garoppolo issue. Now, I don't know why anyone's surprised by that, and this is not me trying to just crap on Jimmy Garoppolo, but what's the problem with Jimmy Garoppolo? He's injury prone. And what is Jimmy Garoppolo not right now? Available. And what's the most important availability in the NFL? Availability. So, do the Raiders, if this continues, if Jimmy's not ready, say, all right, we know you can use Hunter Renfrow. We don't have use for him now that we signed Jacoby Myers to fill the slot. Is there a trade where it's Hunter Renfrow for Jameis and whatever has to be filled to make that deal work? I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I think that's an offer where it's not the most out of this world idea, and that puts the Saints in an interesting spot. Now, I think the Saints would need to see a lot from Jake Haener to trade Jameis Winston because you got to feel comfortable as Haener being that number 2 as opposed to Jameis. But I just think it's a fascinating thing to discuss. I don't have a preference about it because, to tell you the truth, guys, the Saints' injury history at quarterback the last 2-3 years scares the living hell out of me. Drew Brees has gotten hurt. Jameis has gotten hurt. Taysom has gotten hurt. Simeon's gone down. Andy Dalton played through injuries. I mean, everyone got hurt for the last 5 years. For the last 2 years, there's been like 5 different quarterbacks to get hurt. So I think for New Orleans, there is that benefit and that comfortability of keeping Jameis Winston. God forbid Derek Carr goes down. On the other hand, though, teams need quarterbacks. And if you're in a situation where you need one, it's going to be hard to find a better option in June, July, August than Jameis Winston. So that might put the Saints in a tough spot. Either way, I think it's worth discussing, and it's worth even bringing up the fact that the Saints might have a decision to make. And they're only going to have that decision to make, honestly, because Jameis is handling the situation the right way. Because I think he might know it, and maybe the Saints know it too. If he goes out and plays well in training camp and shines in preseason, there might be a trade there. There might for a player like him. So we'll see what happens there. But it's definitely something that I'm just going to keep an eye on, and we'll leave it at that. Now, before I go, if anyone has any comments, questions, predictions, I'll bring them up. If not, we'll gladly end this live session. But I see Mac jumping in, asking what's going on. I'm doing well, man. And asking if I've seen Spider-Verse. Well, as you guys can see the shirt, rocking Spider-Man 2099 right now, I have not seen Spider-Verse yet. I will have seen Spider-Verse by the end of this night, though. I'm going to check it out just after this live stream is over. So obviously excited about that. Everyone knows, in addition to liking the Saints, obviously, I am a major movie nerd, especially when it comes to certain things like Into the Spider-Verse now, Across the Spider-Verse. So we'll see what happens there. I'm excited for that. I know that the NBA Finals is going on, so I feel kind of guilty going to the movie theaters when we got game 1 between Denver and Miami, and obviously can't think of 2 better players to get their first ring than Jokic or Jimmy Butler. But you know what? Sometimes you got to do some stuff for yourself, and this is going to be a situation where this might be it. So that will definitely be my way of treating myself. Steven says, what do you think of a Quan reunion? I'm fascinated by it. I think that for me, what the Saints do at linebacker is going to tell you what they think of DeMarco Jackson and Zach Bond. Because if one of them looks good in camp and one of them has shown development, especially playing off ball, I think the Saints won't be pressing to get a linebacker. Now, I think Quan's window of being an impact player has passed him. I think that ship has sailed, but he knows the system. The energy is contagious when he walks in the building. And similar to just what I said with Jameis, where are you going to find a better option than him if you're a team that needs a quarterback? There are not exactly all pro linebackers sitting there on the open market for you to add. And Quan does know what the Saints bring. So I'm not against it. I'm just really, really hoping that the Saints, whether it is DeMarco Jackson or Zach Bond, one of them can have, even if it's 50% of what Caden Ellis did, that type of improvement. And I'm not saying Caden Ellis' stats. I don't expect either one to even have 50% of what Caden Ellis did production-wise. I'm saying, can you at least make from a skill / I'd say versatility standpoint, the jump half of what Caden Ellis did? Because people forget, Caden Ellis was not this magical off-ball linebacker when he came to New Orleans. And that is something he asked the Saints when he came in. What do I have to get better at? They told him, got to get better off ball. He did get better off ball. So maybe Zach Bond or DeMarco Jackson makes that jump. Who do you think will win the NFC West? I'm actually kind of torn on the NFC West. I'm between two, 49ers and the Seahawks. I think that if the 49ers just get decent and healthy quarterback play, they win the division. I scratch the healthy part. They get injured at that position a lot. I'll say if they get decent quarterback play, I'll still pick them because there's not a team that has more top-end talent than them with guys like Nick Bosa, Fred Warner, Trent Williams, George Kittle, CMC, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk. So they got weapons. So I'm going to lean towards them, but I think Seattle, fantastic draft, brought back Geno Smith, getting better. And you had a great draft last year. So how much better do those guys get? So I'm between Seattle and San Francisco. I'm going to go edge to San Francisco, but I think both teams are going to win double digits. And I think both teams will make the playoffs. Division winners across the league if you got time. Oh, that's fun. So I'll go AFC first. I got the Chiefs winning the AFC West. The AFC South, I have the Jaguars. I really, really, really think this is a team schedule-wise. Maybe they go 12-5. I think that's feasible. And you have to remember, Colts, Titans, Texans in that division, all of them kind of feel like they're rebuilding. They can take advantage of that. AFC North, boy, am I just torn between Ravens and Bengals. I'm going to go slight edge to the Bengals, but wouldn't be surprised if the Ravens win the division. But I'm torn between those two. AFC East, I'm still sticking with the Bills. I think a lot of people are kind of off the Bills bandwagon. Maybe they have Bills fatigue, but I just think Josh Allen's going to have a big year. And I just don't know how good the Jets off the bat are going to be with Rodgers. I could see them going 10-7, 11-6, but they might start slow, where a team like the Bills that has a lot of familiarity might be able to hit the ground running. So that's my AFC. NFC, in the East, I have the Eagles. I love what they did with this offseason. I know there's no repeat champ in the NFC East. At least there hasn't been in 2 decades. But I don't love what Washington's doing. I think Dallas has flaws, especially at the O-line. I think that New York's roster kind of overachieved last year. I just think Philly's got a lot of absolute studs on their team, and they got the best quarterback in the division, Jalen Hurts. So I'll go Eagles. NFC North, I'm going to surprise some people. And we're going to look back at this and be like, Chris, you are such an idiot. Or Chris, you're a prophet and you didn't even know it. I'm going to pick the Packers. Now, everyone's going to be like, what the hell is wrong with you? Why did you pick Green Bay? They just traded Aaron Rodgers. I know they traded Aaron Rodgers. I don't like Chicago's roster yet. I think they have to improve. I do not like Minnesota's roster at all. I think they're going to be a team that takes a massive step back. All those one-score games they won last year, I expect them to lose a good portion of those this year. Plus, they just got rid of every veteran they had on defense. And the Lions, that's going to be a team people talk about. I just can't trust them yet. I just feel like Green Bay, they're going to find a way, run-centric offense with Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, have decent play from Jordan Love. I feel like that might be the formula for them. Maybe 9-8 wins the division. I'm not certain on that. South, I'm going to go the Saints. I feel good about that right now where they're at. Hopefully I'm not wrong, but I really do love this roster. I think it is built to win now. I really, really do. It's about the coaching staff doing their job. And then NFC West, I mentioned the Niners before, so I'll stick with that. Seth says, what do you realistically expect the Saints to do with available cap space? I think you're going to look at receivers. Obviously, if you trade for Hunter Renfrow, that's taking a good portion of that cap space up. And then John alluded to it. Defensive line or linebacker? I think defensive line, and he mentioned Yannick. I think Yannick can really be a big factor for this team if they wanted to, and I think that they'll know more about the D-line as they get through mandatory minicamp. So mandatory minicamp is later this month. When that passes, I think they'll know a little bit more, and then they'll have a better idea of whether or not they need to add another defensive lineman. But I think that's what they can do with their money. And I honestly think for New Orleans, considering they're built to win now, they got to use that money in some way because there'd be no bigger, I'd say, regret you'll have as a team than if you go into the season, you make the playoffs, and you sit there and you had $13 million to spend and you didn't spend it, and you're left thinking, man, maybe if we made one or two more moves, we could have had enough to win it. So I think D-line / linebacker and then wide receiver, those are the spots that I'd be looking at. Extremely hypothetical. What would you give up for Davante Adams to reunite him with Carr? Oh, that's interesting. I really don't know. Don't get me wrong. I would love to see Davante in the black and gold. And I think Davante in the black and gold would be awesome for New Orleans. My worry is Davante is going to cost at least a first, right? To get him. And for people saying no, this is the way I would look at Davante Adams. So he had over 1,500 yards with the Packers in 2021 and 11 touchdowns. And then he got traded for a first and more. And then this first year with the Raiders, he gets traded. He gets traded to the Raiders. And in his first year with the Raiders, he's got over 1,500 receiving yards and 14 touchdowns. So the production didn't take a hit. Production went up in some regards. It would cost at least a first, probably a first and a day 2 pick. And I'm not opposed to the idea of Davante Adams and Saints. Hypothetically, it's freaking awesome. I just think that for New Orleans, I'd love to see them keep that first rounder. I'd love to see them keep their picks for next year. And the only reason I say that is it leaves you that safety net of, God forbid, this doesn't work out. And we're left going, this Saints need a new coaching staff. They need to revamp this roster. You would like to know if this doesn't hit, that you have assets next year. So if there is a new coaching staff, if there is a change in the front office, they have those tools to work with. It's not someone coming in and you're like, all right, well, now we got to wait till 2025 because we don't have those assets. So that's why I'm like kind of scared about that idea, but it sounds fun as hell. Can you imagine Adams, Michael Thomas, Olave, and Shaheed? Teams will be shivering in their boots when you're lining up against them. So it's definitely a fun idea for sure. Anyone know if he hit on D-Hop? Thoughts earlier? So I talked about D-Hop on Monday, which, by the way, we're doing Monday live streams every single Monday in the morning. So make sure this upcoming Monday, you guys are here for that. So this is the way I see the Hopkins thing. I think for the Saints, it makes sense to call. You can never have enough talent at the wide receiver position. And if he does come to the Saints, now you're like, okay, if one of those guys gets hurt, you have that assurance. But I don't think he will be on the Saints. I feel like he's AFC bound. You hear a lot about the Browns. You hear a lot about the Texans. You hear a lot about the Chiefs and the Bills. I'm not saying those are the 4 teams that are going to be the front runners. I'm just saying you're hearing a lot about those teams. And you're not hearing a whole lot about the Saints. And you're not hearing a whole lot about the NFC in general. So I kind of think that's where he goes, to the AFC. I would like the idea. I think it gives the Saints a nice plan in the event that Michael Thomas misses time. But it seems like they might go elsewhere. And who knows? Elsewhere might lead to Hunter Renfrow. Who knows? So that's where I'll leave you with that. But I would say don't get your hopes up. But boy, it would be fun to see D-Hop in a Saints uniform. But anyway, guys, that's going to wrap it up for me here on this edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. As always, I appreciate you guys coming in, dropping your comments, concerns, questions, even if you just came in to say hello. Always appreciate that. Just a reminder, Monday coming up, we'll have another live stream in the morning. New Saints topics to be determined about what we talk about there. And as always, you can bring your comments, questions there, and I'll bring them up. And then we can kind of shift the conversation in that regard. So don't miss that. Now, before I go check out Spider-Verse, Seth's asking Saints win-loss prediction this year. I said 10-7 earlier this year. I'm going to go 11-6, and I'm going to leave it at that for now. 11-6 for the Saints. That's where I'm feeling. 10-7. Worst case, 9-8. That's my worst case scenario I'll give them. But 11-6 is where I'm at, and that's where I'll leave you guys on this Thursday night. So thank you again so much for listening to this edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. And as always, guys, stay tuned for more content and subscribe to Boot Crew Media's YouTube page so you can get more content here from the Straight Up Saints podcast, the destination for the Who Dat